When I married Melissa, I knew loving her meant embracing her daughter, Layla, too. She was 18 then, reserved, thoughtful, with a quiet grace that made you want to protect her. Life hadn't been easy on her. Her father had died when she was just a child, and the void left behind was something no one could truly fill. Still, she tried. We all did. We moved into a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, rows of modest homes with trimmed lawns, families that waved from porches, and dogs that barked more than bit. It felt safe, even idyllic. The kind of place where people borrowed sugar and brought over leftover pie. It was 3 months into our new life when Marcus moved in next door. Tall, confident, with a voice that could sell anything and a smile. That disarmed suspicion, Marcus quickly became the neighbor everyone admired. He helped shovel snow without being asked, offered to fix broken fences, and always made time for friendly conversation. People trusted him, and so did we. Melissa liked him instantly, said he reminded her of an old friend from college. Layla, though cautious at first, gradually opened up. I noticed the change. She laughed more around him, asked questions about music he liked, and often mentioned things he said. I told myself it was harmless. Marcus treated Layla like a favorite niece, or so it appeared. He praised her intelligence, encouraged her photography, and once gifted her a vintage camera after learning she'd lost hers in the move. It seemed generous, too generous, but I swallowed my doubts. After all, he had done nothing wrong, and who was I to question kindness? Still, something tugged at me. Layla had always been careful with people. She didn't warm up easily, didn't trust just anyone. But with Marcus, her guard lowered at a pace that felt unnatural. She'd started spending more time next door, helping him organize books or cook meals when his niece visited. She insisted it was no big deal. Melissa said I was being overprotective. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't shake the unease. A man, that charming, that perfect, always seemed like a mask waiting to slip. And yet we said nothing. We let our guard down because we wanted to believe in the good of people, because Marcus never crossed a line, or at least not one we could see. And because sometimes betrayal doesn't come in the form of a stranger, it walks right through your front door with a smile and a helping hand. Looking back now, I realize the signs were there. We just chose not to see them. But everything changed the morning we found Layla unconscious in her room. And that was the moment the illusion shattered. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's presence in our lives grew quietly but steadily. He had a way of making himself useful without asking, showing up with solutions before we even realized we had problems. A leaking pipe? He had the tools. A heavy package? He was already at the door. He became a fixture, always nearby, always attentive. Layla had begun visiting him more often. At first, it was under the guise of helping with his niece's schoolwork or sorting through his endless collection of vinyl records. But soon, she stopped offering reasons at all. She would slip out in the afternoons and return just before dinner, her mood often unreadable, neither cheerful nor visibly upset, just quiet. Melissa didn't question it. She believed in giving Layla space, especially after all she'd been through. I tried to agree, but I couldn't ignore what I felt. Something wasn't right. One evening, Layla came home later than usual. She claimed she'd fallen asleep, watching a movie at Marcus's house, then dismissed our concern with a tired smile. "He's like family," she said. "He looks out for me." That phrase, it echoed in my mind longer than it should have. The next day, I noticed Layla had stopped bringing her phone to dinner. Her eyes seemed distant. Her laughter, when it came, felt rehearsed. At night, I'd sometimes hear her moving around in her room, long after the rest of the house had settled. Melissa assured me it was just teenage restlessness, but my gut said otherwise. I decided to speak with Marcus. I kept it light, mentioned how often Layla had been helping out and whether it was becoming too much. He smiled, easy as ever. "She's bright," he said. "Curious. I see a lot of potential in her. I just want to help her grow." It sounded noble. Too noble. That night, I stood by Layla's door for a moment before knocking. When I entered, she was curled up with her sketchbook, eyes red-rimmed. I asked if everything was okay. She nodded too quickly, then looked away. "Marcus said I'm special," she said, almost a whisper. "He understands me in ways no one else does." A knot formed in my chest. It was the kind of statement that should bring comfort. Instead, it felt like a warning. But I didn't push. I told her I was always here if she needed to talk. She nodded again. That was the end of it. For then. Melissa noticed the change too. She said Layla seemed older, burdened, but she chalked it up to growing pains. We both wanted to believe nothing was wrong. We wanted to trust Marcus. But that trust, I now realize, was a fragile glass. And soon it would crack beyond repair. Something was coming. We just didn't know how soon. The night before everything collapsed was unusually still. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and a faint hum of thunder rolled through the distance. Layla had gone next door in the late afternoon, saying Marcus needed help organizing old photo albums. She promised to be back by 7, but 7 came and went. Melissa tried calling. No answer. I walked to Marcus's porch, knocked twice. He opened the door with his usual calm demeanor, claiming Layla had just left. I hurried back, expecting to see her walking up the path. But the porch light stayed dim. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the front door creaked open. Layla stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She didn't speak, just gave a small, tired nod before slipping silently to her room. Melissa called after her, but she didn't respond. Something was wrong. I could feel it like a weight in my chest. Melissa went to her room once, gently tapped on the door, but Layla insisted she was tired and needed sleep. We let her be. That was our mistake. The next morning, the silence was louder than usual. No footsteps, no music from her phone. Melissa knocked again. No response. I followed, something inside me already unraveling. We opened the door. She was curled up on her bed, eyes closed, skin cold and damp with sweat. Her breathing was shallow. Melissa screamed. I called emergency services, barely holding it together as I gave our address. At the hospital, everything blurred. Rushed voices, urgent hands, quiet whispers behind closed curtains. The doctors told us she was stable but emotionally unresponsive. There was no sign of physical harm, but something had broken inside her. When she finally awoke that evening, her gaze was far away. Melissa held her hand, tears streaming down her face. I stayed silent, waiting. Then Layla spoke, softly, as if afraid of the words themselves. He said no one understood me like he did, that I was different, mature, that I could handle what others couldn't. Her voice cracked. I didn't know how to say no. I thought it was my fault. Those words tore through me. She told us how Marcus had slowly isolated her, filling her head with ideas of love disguised as mentorship. It hadn't been violent, but it had been a betrayal of the worst kind, an abuse of trust, of power, of innocence. Melissa collapsed into tears. I sat frozen, rage and guilt colliding inside me. I had seen the signs. I had ignored them. We left the hospital in silence, broken in ways we hadn't yet begun to understand. Marcus didn't answer his door that night, but I knew we'd never see him the same way again. And whatever came next, we would not let him bury it in silence. The morning after Layla's confession, the house sat in a strange stillness. Nothing moved except the ticking clock on the wall, and even that felt too loud. Melissa hadn't spoken a word since we returned from the hospital. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold tea, her hands trembling with quiet fury. I, on the other hand, couldn't sit still. My mind spun with questions, guilt, and an ache that refused to fade. I called the police. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was clarity, raw and overdue. Layla had trusted Marcus. We all had. And that trust had been used as a weapon. I told the officers everything. The changes in her behavior, his manipulations, and finally, her own words from that hospital bed. They listened, took notes, and promised to investigate. Marcus wasn't home when they arrived. His house stood quiet, the curtains drawn, the driveway empty. The officers said they'd put out a notice. I watched them leave, frustration swelling in my chest. Justice felt too slow for something so vile. Meanwhile, Layla stayed quiet. She hadn't returned to her room but instead moved into the guest bedroom, as though reclaiming a small piece of safety. Melissa stayed by her side. They spoke in fragments, mostly in the language of touch and presence. Words weren't always needed. I caught Layla once looking out the window at Marcus's house. Her eyes weren't angry. They were tired. Tired of pretending, tired of fearing, tired of feeling like it was her fault. "You're not to blame," I told her, kneeling beside her. "Not for what happened, and not for what you felt." She nodded, but I knew healing would take more than words. Days passed. Then a week. The police found Marcus in a neighboring town, staying under a different name. He was taken into custody, quietly. The charges weren't dramatic, emotional manipulation, endangerment, but they were real, and more importantly, they were public. Word spread through the neighborhood. The friendly smiles vanished, whispers filled the air. Some neighbors tried to express shock, others guilt. Most simply avoided eye contact. But we didn't care. We weren't there to ease their discomfort. We were there for Layla. She started therapy. Slowly, she began drawing again. Melissa and I stayed close, rebuilding not just her sense of safety, but our own broken trust as a family. It wasn't the ending we imagined when we moved into that quiet neighborhood, but it was a new beginning. Imperfect, honest, and hard-earned. Betrayal had cracked the foundation of our lives, but the truth helped us begin again, stronger, wiser, and far more aware. And Layla, she's not just surviving, she's learning to rise.